Hi folks, in this video we're going to look at converting a fraction into a decimal. So there's a few fractions that we need to try and just memorize what they are as decimals off by heart. You might know a few of them already. Half is equal to 0.5. So that fraction, 1/2, and that decimal, 0.5, those are the same. Some key fractions to memorize are a half, a third because it's a bit weird. A third is 0.3 recurring, and it's written like that. You might see it written with a little bar instead, but usually it's just a dot above the 3. What that means is 0.3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, and the 3's go on forever. There is literally infinity 3's. They go on and on and on forever. 0.3 recurring. So that's a third. A quarter is 0.25. A small way to remember that is we can think of 0.5 as 0.50, and half of 50 is 25, and a quarter is half of a half. So a half is 0.5, a quarter is 0.25. And then a fifth, one little trick for a fifth is we can just swap the 2 and the 5 in a half and 0.5 around to give us 1/5 equals 0.2. 1/6 and 1/7 aren't really important. An eighth you don't really need to know either, but we might as well because it's kind of easy. If we think of a quarter as 0.250, we can half 250 for 125. That gives us an eighth, 0.125. A ninth is worth remembering because a ninth is a third of a third, and a third of 0.3 recurring is 0.1 recurring. So that's 0.111111, and there's infinity ones. And then a tenth is 0.1, and then you should probably be able to work out things like 1/20, which would be this but with an extra 0 before the 5, so 0.05. And it's the same for all of them. So 1/30 is 0.0 and then 3 recurring. So 1/30 is 0.033333333 forever, which is written like that, 0.03 with a dot above it. 1/40 would be 0.025, and we can just add a 0 before all of these. Then also maybe it's worth memorizing 1/25, because this is kind of like where we swap the 5 and the 2 around in a half and 0.5. We can swap the 2, 5 and the 4 around, and we can make this 0. You've got to remember to put an extra 0 though, 0.04, because that's the number 4, and if we think of that as a 25, that would be like 04, like 25. Got to remember your place values. So 1/25 is 0.04, and then from there we can multiply these by anything. So if you want to know what something like let's say 4/9 is as a decimal, we can look at 1/9, which is 0.1 recurring, and multiply that by 4. So if we were to times that by 4, all of the ones just get multiplied by 4, and it would become 0.4 recurring. And then you might start to see some patterns, like 3/9 would be 0.3 recurring. And we can make some connections there, like 3/9 simplifies to a third, which is also 0.3 recurring. So that makes sense that 3/9, if we multiply that by 3, gives us the same as what 1/3 is, which is what 3/9 are. So we can start to make some more connections like that. From there, some slightly trickier ones might be something like 3/4. So we would need to multiply this by 3. Well, we can think of 25 times 3, which is 75. 25, 50, 75. So this would be 0.75. We could also, if we know that 3/4 is 1/2 and 1/4, we could take 0.5 and 0.25 and add them together as well. And that works just fine. So 5, and then 2 and 5 is 7. Keep your decimals lined up, 0 and 0 is 0, so 0.75. So we can add decimals with column addition as long as you keep the decimal lined up. So 3/4 is 0.75, and then some slightly trickier ones might be something like 7/8. So to work out 7/8, what I would do is think of 1, which is just 1.000, or 1.000000. Doesn't matter how many zeros on the end, it's just all equal to 1, and we can subtract 1/8 from that, that would give us 7/8. So we can take away 0.125 from the number 1. So we would have to borrow 10, that becomes a 0, that becomes a 10, borrow 10 again, that becomes a 9, that becomes a 10, borrow 10 again, that becomes a 9, and that becomes a 10. And then we can do 10 minus 5, 9 minus 2, 9 minus 1, and that will give us 7/8. So 10 minus 5, it's going to end in a 5, 9 minus 2 is 7, 9 minus 1 is 8, and then 0 minus 0 is 0. So 7/8 is 0.875. So it's worth remembering 1 over all of these numbers. Try to commit those to memory, but something like 2 over some of these numbers and 3 over some of these numbers you can figure out fairly simply. 3/4 is worth memorising as well though, because that's a really common one. So memorise the quarters. Remember 2/4 is just a half, so 2/4 is just 0.5. And that's it. So definitely commit as many of those to memory as you can. If that's something that you're going to struggle with, then the most important ones are a half, a quarter, a fifth, a tenth, and maybe a third as well. Those 5. So if nothing else, commit those 5 to memory.